Hey everybody, RedMage here. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be answering some of my subscriber and viewer questions. Basically, a few days ago, I posted on YouTube asking people to send in questions if they wanted me to answer them about whatever, basically anything. And I got a whole bunch of responses both on YouTube and in my email. I'm really grateful to everybody who asked a question or reached out. It's awesome to see the response. I'm not going to be able to go through every question I got in this video. If people are interested, if there are more questions, I'll try to either answer them in the comments, or if people want, I can do another one of these videos at some point. But for now, I'll just try to answer the questions as many as I can. And I'll focus on the YouTube ones, but I'll try to answer some emails as well. Again, thanks to everybody who sent these in. They're really interesting ones. There's a little bit of overlap, so I might kind of answer the same question a few times. I'll try to make it a different answer, right? I mean, like, interesting each time. But there are some that are related, so there'll probably be a lot of overlap there. The first question is by Sazonka. The question was, or I guess it's more of a statement, but there's an implied question there. Very interested in your Shadow Dark or OSE house rules, specifically for your Dolmenwood setting. So thank you, Sazonka. Well, when it comes to Shadow Dark, first of all, I use a number of house rules, or rules that I found from other systems or other places. The main difference, I would say, is my health hit point rules. I use a different system there. I used, I think it was originally Into the Odd. I'm actually not sure where the idea came from, but dividing hit points into flesh and grit. So your hit points are kind of your grit. They're kind of your hero points, the adrenaline, energy, whatever you want to call it. But when you go to 0 there, you don't die outright. You go into Constitution, and the Constitution score is what's diminished after that. You have a chance of going unconscious basically any time you take damage when you're at 0 hit points. So that's one house rule that I use. I don't use, for Shadow Dark, I don't use always on initiative, and I don't use the timer for torches and things like that. I think I would use those if I were with a different group, if I were with new players, or if I were with a different dynamic, but the particular players that I have are really, really good. I think the idea of always on initiative, where you take turns taking your turn, going around the table in and out of combat, is cool, but I think it really helps for, well, it really helps for specifically dungeons, which I do run, but also it helps specifically for new players who aren't as confident, making sure everybody gets a chance to kind of talk at the table and to have their moment each round. And my players have hit a pretty good rhythm. They've been playing together for a long time now, and so I just don't feel like I need that. But I would probably use it if I were with a new group who, especially if there were some players who were really dominant and other players who kind of weren't necessarily happy to just sit there and watch, because some players are, but wanted to get involved but were a little bit too reticent or hesitant or something like that. I would definitely use always on initiative. The torch timer, I think, is a cool mechanic. I would use it if I were leaning into a dungeon, for example, that had like an active timer, where like you have a real world, like Castle in the Curse or something, where you have real time, right? And then I might use the torch timer. But in a general sense, my group has a lot of breaks. We take breaks. We're all busy people with lives and families and things, and so we play online. It's really hard to just sit down and lock out the time when you're playing in different locations. Online, people come to your computer, start talking, you have to step away for a minute, whatever it is. So the always on timer is less useful in that environment. If you could sit down and just play for a straight amount of time, like, hey, we're gonna have our game night, and it's gonna be from 6:30 to 10 on Wednesday every night, and you're all gonna come over to my house. Most people do that. That's what I used to do when I lived nearby a lot of my players. Then that's what I would do. I would be much more inclined to use the always on timer. The last thing I do, well, two things I do as well for my house rules for my Shadow Dark game are I use the underclock die instead of random encounters from other systems. So I don't use the Shadow Dark system. I don't use the OSE system. I use the underclock die. It's so good. If you guys haven't used the underclock die before, I can't recommend it enough. It adds tension. It gives the players some kind of sense of the building dread. It does build dread as opposed to just sudden encounter. And it's just as statistically likely, you're statistically just as likely to have the same amount of encounters in a night, but the chance of not having an encounter goes way down, and the chance of having a bunch of encounters back to back goes way down. So it averages it out. So you're more likely to have the same number. It's again, statistically, it's about the same, but the spikes are lower. And so you don't get these boring sessions where you don't encounter anything, and you don't really get the encounters where it's like, well, we couldn't do the main adventure because we just had so many random encounters. I started to use it for my West marches because it was really effective in that, and I just kept using it. So that's one thing I use. If you guys don't know that, you should check it out. I'll try to remember to put a link below to the Underclock Die blog where I found it originally. It's so good. And then I think it was Skirples. I think it was Coins and Scrolls. Could be wrong about that though. And then the last thing that I do is I use D6 initiative round based. So I don't use static initiative, and I don't have every player roll with their decks every round. Instead, I just do side-based initiative using a d6 every round. And whichever side rolls higher goes. Now, I have a couple interesting, there's a couple interesting effects of that always on, or that initiative there, that initiative system. One of the effects of that initiative system that I really like is that the players never really have downtime. Either they're planning and acting, or they're being acted upon by the creatures. What you don't get, one of my big problems with 5th edition, I think a lot of people's problem with 5th edition, or the standard initiative rules, is you roll it, everyone rolls, that takes a bit of time at the beginning of combat, kind of undercuts the tension right away, because you have this big description, you go, 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 and then, okay, everybody roll initiative, and that can take a while. People have a lot of workarounds about that, where you have static initiative, or people have cards to make it go quickly, but it is slow. And then, during combat, a player is taking their turn, and every other player is sitting there watching, because it's not going to affect them, because they're not going to be attacked by the other player, and they aren't acting. And so it's really easy to check out during initiative. And I think there are players who stay active and are interested, but it's really easy to be like, all right, especially with a big group or with a big combat, it's easy to go like, okay, I'm just going to take my turn, and then I'll, do whatever until my turn comes. I'll check my phone or whatever it might be. Group initiative removes that possibility, because everybody has to plan at the same time, and they plan in relation to each other. And then what I do is I have everything happen simultaneously. And that makes a very interesting dynamic too, because you can't, as a player, you can't rely on another player's success before you choose what to do. So you can't say like, okay, you attack the boss, and if you kill him, then I'll attack his minion. You can't do that. If you're like, look, we have to kill this guy, you have to say, well, we're all going to attack him then. Because, yeah, it'll probably be overkill, but if you miss, if only one of us attacks and you miss, then we're doomed, because then he gets his turn, he's going to attack. So there's this real tension of like, okay, how do we split things? Some GMs are a little bit bummed because they're like, well, that's pretty meta that all the players every round get to pause and talk about their plan. But I think the trade-offs are certainly worth it. And if you want to explain it kind of in-world, chances are the party would discuss tactics at some point, right? And so you're kind of building that fiction into the world, that this is an execution of a plan that the party probably came up with at some point for, when you're fighting a big group or when you're fighting a single boss, or it's mimicking the sort of calls during combat that you might have. So I think that's fine. It doesn't bother me that it's a little bit meta, but I think the payoff is so worth it. That fact that everybody's engaged the whole fight, because again, either you're planning and executing your action, or it's the monster's turn, in which case you're paying attention because they're moving around and doing damage and attacking. It has another really cool benefit too, and that's when both sides roll the same number. And then what I do is I just have simultaneous initiative. Everybody declares their action, and if there's a question, I have them declare in reverse order of wisdom. So if someone's like, I want to wait until somebody else, what's he going to do before I decide? You say, okay, well, what's your wisdom score? And if it's lower than the enemies, then you have to declare before you know what the enemy does. If it's higher than the enemies, then you get to declare after. That's kind of the idea. And so if you have just like a set action you're going to do, well, great. But if you're like, I want to kind of read the battlefield, then you use your wisdom score. And then once everybody's declared, including the monsters, then everybody just rolls and everything happens simultaneously. And what I like about that is it slows down. Combat goes pretty fast because you do round-based initiative every round. It goes pretty fast, and then suddenly you roll the same number and it slows down. And it's way more tense because everything's happening at once. And that means, for example, monsters and players could kill each other at the same time, because you both rolled the same number, you both attack each other, and you both hit and kill. So you could theoretically kill the enemy at the same time. And if there's like a question of like sequence, where something really matters, sequence really matters, then I have just the people whose sequence matter roll a dex check. Who gets it off first? If you're trying to get it off second, then again, you pass. You can decide if it goes off first or second. That's basically it. That's my initiative Those are the different major house rules that I use. I don't have any specifically Dolmenwood setting rules yet. I'm sure that I will develop some as we go forward. That's one of the things that I notice as I play a campaign, right, is that house rules, home rules, they kind of develop over time. And I haven't yet played in my Dolmenwood campaign. I'm getting things ready, but I haven't yet played it. And I actually think I'm going to be running it as written, not using Shadow Dark. At least for the first couple sessions. I want to try out the system, basically. And then if I really don't like it, or if I'm like, yeah, it's good, but, then I'll go back to Shadow Dark. But I think we're going to try Dolmenwood as written for the first few sessions. So anyway, thank you, Sazonka. I know it was a long answer, but thank you for your question. All right, next question is by Frank Fermat. And Frank asks, what are your favorite adventures that you have actually run? Maybe a top 10 of that would be cool. What advice would you give to brand new DMs? I know there are tons of videos from other channels out there on this topic, but your positivity stands out as a content maker, and I would be curious what you would say. Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. I just love this stuff, and so I'm glad that the kind of positivity, I guess you're describing there, I'm glad that it comes across. I really would like people to, this is such a cool hobby, and I think there's a temptation to get kind of, I don't know, isolated and campy and like this group versus that group and OSR versus new games, and it's like, just, it's all super fun. Even you can have tons of fun with an otherwise quote unquote bad system. So I try not to be negative. That's why I try to stay out of the drama of like, whatever's happening in the world of, Wizards of the Coast, or like, the different OSR factions and this group versus that group. I just try to stay out of all of that. Social media is pretty toxic in my opinion, so I stay off of it for the most part. Okay. What are your favorite adventures that you've actually run? I don't know if I can do a top 10. I don't know. I would probably have to second guess myself and come back here, but I can do top 5. I don't know if any in particular order, but I can give you 5 adventures that I've actually run that have been incredible. My favorite in a lot of ways. And I would say those are, first of all, The Waking of Willoughby Hall. Probably my favorite adventure of all time. I've run that 3 times, and each time it's been wildly different. It's been wacky. It's been incredible. The Waking of Willoughby Hall by Ben Milton, who runs the Questing Beast channel and blog. If you haven't seen that, you need to check it out. The Waking of Willoughby Hall is so good. It's the definition of a sandbox. So much crazy, wacky stuff can happen. It has a certain tone that not everybody loves, sort of wacky, no major story. It's going to have not really like a lot of serious roleplay drama. And some people live for that, but that's not the tone of the adventure. The adventure is have fun, get into wacky situations, encounter strange, bizarre things, and have fun, pushing buttons and twisting dials and making the adventure go crazy, both from the GM's perspective and the players. So The Waking of Willoughby Hall, I think, is number 1. But under that, there's a whole bunch that I really, really like that I've run, and I would say 4 of them are Castles in Tillin, which is the mega dungeon by EMDT, is Gabor Lux, I think. That's such a good mega dungeon. It's so good. Oh my goodness. Again, I've done a review of all of these at some point on my channel, but that's one that you should check out. The Waking of Willoughby Hall and Castles in Tillin. And then the other 3, I would say Incandescent Grottos by Necrotic Gnome Press. That one is so good. I think that's Gavin Norman. I ran that, I put that in my West Marches, that location, the Incandescent Grottos in my West Marches, and the players went back to it over and over and over and over. There was so much stuff to do there. It was so vivid in their imagination. As they went deeper into it, they encountered weirder and weirder things. The Dream Dragon, the cult. There's tons of cool stuff. They loved the troglodytes and interacting with the different kind of small factions between them. Oh, it was super fun. So Incandescent Grottos is probably another one that I've loved that I've run. And then Winter's Daughter, also by Gavin Norman. That's a Dolmenwood adventure. That one was absolutely fantastic. It's super fun, and it's really beautiful. It has the very strong fairy tale vibe. In fact, one of my players, at the very end of it, when we were kind of going through the climax, she had tears in her eyes. And that was crazy. And she said it was so moving and very beautiful. And it wasn't just the way that like I ran it, which I think I did a pretty good job there, but just the very tone of the adventure lends itself to that. It has wacky, whimsical characters and funny encounters. It has some dangerous, cool things. It has puzzles, but it has this sense of real pathos that I like. And it's pretty rare to get that in a published adventure. I'm not one of those DMs who runs like dramatic, sad, games that crush your soul. That's not really my vibe. I mostly run dungeons and killing creatures and getting treasure and loot and experience and, that sort of thing. That's sort of my vibe. But Winter's Daughter was the exception, and I thought it was really, really cool. It's one of the reasons why I love Dolmenwood so much. That was kind of my first encounter with it, and it was just really moving. It was also just a fun adventure. So Winter's Daughter. And then finally, and I recognize this is probably not in the same objective category as the others, I just love it. It's the Sunless Citadel from 3rd edition. It was one of the first 3rd edition adventures, if not the first 3rd edition official adventure published. And it was my first adventure I played in D&D after their little box set for 3rd edition. 3rd edition came out with this right away. It was like 1998 or 1999, maybe 2000. I don't remember exactly. I was pretty young. But they came out with like a box set with tokens and a little paper map, and they had like a booklet of several very small adventures. Some were like 2 rooms, and then the biggest was like, maybe 12 or 15 rooms or something like that. So it was a relatively small dungeons, and it reminded me of HeroQuest because of the way that the dungeon was laid out, because of the way that the tokens worked. There were basically flat tokens instead of furniture. But I had played tons of HeroQuest as a kid, and so it was like getting me into that. They had pre-made characters. That was where you had like Ragdar and Tordek and Miali and all the different like kind of standard characters for 3rd edition. And then my brother got the Sunless Citadel, which was a published adventure by Wizards of the Coast. This is Bruce Cordell. And that was the first one I ever played in. And so it has a really special place in my heart. My brother ran games very differently back in the day. He ran them as sort of like mini sandboxes, even if they were just published adventures. So the Sunless Citadel, as written, is pretty linear, right? You go to the town, and then you go to the dungeon, and there's a few ways through the dungeon. But my brother always was so good at riffing and kind of improving that when I played it as a kid, I never thought of like the dungeon as the thing I had to do. I just remember we often, I remember I played through that adventure. I tried to play through that adventure several times. I never really beat it as a kid. Never got to the end. But we would play it a few times, and I would ask, hey, can you run Sunless Citadel again for this group, or me and my friend, or me and my cousin, or whoever it might be, and my brother would oblige. But every time it was slightly different because we would make different choices, and because he was so good at improv, we would end up in totally wildly different places. Like, sometimes we'd go to the dungeon, but other times we'd end up at, like, the festival in town where the goblins are buying and selling the fruit and getting into wacky adventures there, or we'd, spin off and start going into the not necessarily local politics, but try to sneak into the local lord's house to steal something. Like, he would just riff on it and use it as sort of a mini sandbox. And so I think of it as a playground rather than as a strict linear dungeon. But anyway, I love that one. So those are my top 5, I would say, in no particular order. What advice would I give to brand new DMs? I would say be okay making mistakes, be okay going slow, but just run games. Run games. The only way you're going to learn is by experience. You can watch all the videos you want and they'll help you, but you've got to just run games, and you've got to learn what works, and you've got to experience that feeling of the high of a good encounter running well and your players getting into it, and the low of presenting something kind of boring that your players don't bite and running a bad adventure. Like, you kind of just got to get through that and experience it, because it's going to happen. You're going to run great adventures, you're going to run really bad adventures, boring adventures. It's just no DM bats 1,000, right? You always end up somewhere in between. So that's what I would say, is just start running, start playing games, find something that you really like, find a cool adventure, make sure it's something you actually really want to see, and then prepare to improvise, prepare to riff on it. And finally, I would say it's just important to remember there's no one way to run a good D&D game. It's going to depend on you, it's going to depend on your players, it's going to depend on your system, it's going to depend on how people are feeling. I've had super memorable adventures that were very linear and story-based, and the players didn't really have much choice, and it felt really fun, and we had a cool story, and we still talk about it to this day. And I've had amazing adventures that were open sandboxes, where wacky things were happening because the players decided to go off the rails. I've had great adventures all over the place. So try not to get bogged down in like, I'm going to run the perfect adventure, or I'm going to run it the right way. I would just say start running. And again, be ready to have some great moments in bad sessions and some bad moments in good sessions. That's what I would say. So anyway, thank you, Frank, for your question. Bloodwolf Ninja 109 asked, how would you lighten the deadliness of old school D&D without taking too much away from the danger? That's a really good question, and I think it depends on the degree to which you want deadliness and the degree to which you want to lighten it, obviously. But what I found, I've already talked about this a little bit already in this video, but what I found was a really good mix was this flesh grit system. So I use Shadow Dark, and in Shadow Dark you get hit points back at every long rest. And I didn't really want that. I didn't want the tone of like, hey, you're completely reset every long rest. There's no short rests in Shadow Dark, but I wanted some lingering effect from a bad encounter, from an encounter that was dangerous. And simultaneously, I also felt that just going to 0 hit points and then immediately going into death rolls was actually fairly deadly. So in Shadow Dark, right, either you're dead, pretty much, or you recover at the long rest and you're fine. I wanted a middle ground between those, and I didn't really want to go old school essentials, 0 hit points, you're dead, and I didn't want to do D&D death saves, three rolls, best out of 5, and you're kind of actually more likely to save anyway because it's 10 or higher, and 20 wakes you up, and yeah. So anyway, not getting into that too much. So what I did was this flesh and grit system. Hit points go down as normal. When they get to 0, what I do is any excess damage comes out of your constitution. So say you have 10 hit points and 10 constitution, and you take 15 damage. Well, your hit points go to 0, and then your constitution would go down to 5. Now, at that point, whenever your hit points are at 0 or below, and you take damage, or you've taken damage and it's taken your hit points to 0, then you have to roll a con check to stay awake. Basically, it's like a shock test or a consciousness test or whatever, a resilience test. And I usually make it DC 12. And the idea there is if you pass it, then you stay conscious and you go to 1 hit point. So you don't stay at 0, you go to 1. So you can actually regain 1 hit point if you go to 0 every turn. But your constitution stays at whatever it was set at, right? So if you're, say that situation came up and you have 10 hit points, 10 constitution, you take 15 damage, and you roll a DC 12 check. Now remember, your constitution is going to be going down, so that means your modifier is going down. So actually, a DC 12, you'd have to roll a 15 or higher, because if you've gotten down to 5 con, that's a -3. So you actually have to roll 15. That's pretty hard. So as you take damage, it's harder to stay awake. It's harder to stay conscious. But let's say you pass it, you roll a 16 or something like that. Okay, well now you're at 1 hit point because you reset to 1, but you're still at 5 con. And that means you have only 6 hit points left before you're dead outright, because if you go to 0 con, then you're dead outright. So if you take another 6 damage, well, then you're dead. But let's say you fail that con check. Well, then you go unconscious. And what I say is at the start of every subsequent round, you lose 1 con as you're bleeding out. So you do have a bit of a death timer, but it's a death timer that depends upon how much con you had to begin with. I think it's a really good system for a number of reasons. First of all, it does lighten the immediate deadliness. If you go to 0, you're not just dead. It also gives you a consequence for taking damage long term. Because you only get, in my system, you only get 1 con point back during a long rest. So that means if you have 10 con and you've taken 9, you're down to 1, it's going to take you 9 days of rest to get back to full constitution. And you could modify that however much you want. You could say you have to make a check to gain a con point back. You could make it a D4 if you want to heal it. And in fact, I say if you have a person in the party with the surgeon background, and they're attending to you during your short rest, during your long rest, then you can get a D4 back. Or if you go back to town and you're somewhere safe, you can get a D4 back. And if you pay for surgery, you can get a D6 back. So essentially there's a way of like modifying it, but it's still pretty slow to recover. But your hit points come back every long rest, back to full. So you're not completely useless, especially if you have high hit points, if you go down to low con. But there's still a major risk because there are some things that damage con directly, like undead. I don't do XP drain, I do con drain. So if a ghoul hits you, it doesn't drain your levels, or a wight hits you, it doesn't drain your levels, it drains your constitution. So if you're at low constitution, then you're dead, right? You run up against a vampire or a wight or a ghost or something like that. You got to get out of there, even if you have a lot of hit points. So players start to feel more terror about undead without having that XP drain, because I just hate XP drain. It happened to me when I was a kid leveling up, and I had such a bad feeling towards it. It wasn't fun, it was anti-fun. I don't like anti-fun mechanics. I like dangerous mechanics, I like risky mechanics, I like mechanics that put peril on the players and risk on the players and hardship on the players. I don't like anti-fun mechanics, and XP drain is anti-fun. So yeah, I think this is a good middle ground for that. It also helps narratively. It really helps narratively, because if you're describing a battle then players take hit point damage. That's not actually them getting hit yet, or at least it's not them, bleeding or getting cut open or stabbed or something. That's them getting winded or weaker or, more drained, or maybe taking bruises or getting punched or getting a broken rib, like something that's not going to be existential. It's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to hurt, it's going to impact them, and they're going to have to recover from it. Twisting an ankle or something like that, but it's not actual damage. But once they start taking constitution, once their flesh starts taking damage, then they're getting actually cut, right? Then they're actually getting stabbed, then they're at risk of death. So it builds in injury without having to do a whole injury mechanic. So that's what I would say. That's my answer. How do I lighten the deadliness? I shift away from immediate death at 0 hit points, and I build in longer term consequence, but not like super long term, not like an injury system. You just shift this, and what it does is it lightens the deadliness of Shadow Dark, but it's still much deadlier than 5th edition, and it creates really interesting choices for the players as they continue their adventure. It also, in a way, makes it harder than Shadow Dark, because in Shadow Dark, if you survive the encounter and you take that rest, you're back to full. You're ready to go. And this is not true for this. If you go down to 0 hit points and you start taking con damage, even if you get the long rest, you're still in danger. From undead, from poison, from fall damage, from anything that deals your con directly. Okay, so thank you, Blood Wolf Ninja. That's what I would say there. Ulfhammer, V7U, asks, have you looked at Forbidden Lands RPG? Looked at in a very brief way. I have it. I've read through a tiny bit of it. I think back in the day I watched somebody's review of it, maybe Questing Beasts or somebody. But I haven't really gone through it in detail. So I can't talk about Forbidden Lands very much. I remember I really liked the art, and I hated what they did with halflings. That's all I remember. Halflings were murderous little beasts, and the art was awesome. But that's really all I know about it, all I can remember about it. Okay, so anyway, thank you for your question there. JL Visual Arts asks, have you done a desert island book before? What is the one book/one adventure you could run over and over again till the end of days? Probably something like Castles Antillon. I think even something like, just because there's so much of it, and because it has so much variety in the NPCs and the factions you could play, maybe one of those big mega dungeons. Ardenville, maybe. It wouldn't really be running it over and over again. It would just be running the same dungeon, and it would take years and years and years to play through. So maybe the Halls of Ardenville. But if I could only do a short adventure or something like that, a short book, then short-ish, I'd probably do something like Castles Antillon. Because it's a mega dungeon, but it's not, insanely huge. And there's just so much fun and wackiness there. And I think I'd have even something like The Waking of Willoughby Hall, I think I would get a little tired of after a few years of running it. Over in a few, the 10th time, I'd probably be bored of it. Probably Ardenville. That's what I would say. It's kind of a cheating answer because it just has so much. I mean, just, thousands of hours worth of gameplay and more room to expand. Fortunately, I'm one of those people who, for a long time, just made all of my own adventures. I do like adapting adventures. So what I would probably do is something like Ardenville, and run it, and then adapt it, and change things and add my own. That's probably what I do. It gets kind of a cheating answer, but that's what I would say. Thank you for your question. Let's see. Blood Wolf Ninja asked another question. I plan to insert Dolmenwood into the Western Reaches, replacing the Gloaming, but instead of converting either setting to Shadow Dark or Old School Essentials, I'm going to try just running the rules associated with the setting. Do you think that will cause consistency issues with flavor? It might, but I don't think it would be a huge deal. It would be kind of hard to transition, so if the players are playing in Dolmenwood, you use that system, and then when they leave, you shift over to Shadow Dark. You're going to have to adapt, and that will certainly change abilities, that'll change power level. I think that's actually kind of tricky. Flavor is actually the least of my worries there. It would be about balance and players being happy with how you change their characters, because you can't just run Shadow Dark in the Dolmenwood system or vice versa. You have to make some adaptations, even just in the terms of like spellcasting. And you'd have to be really sure your players were okay with the changes. So I think that would be the issue, not flavor. Yeah. But when it comes to balance, I did this earlier. I converted the monster manual from Dolmenwood into Shadow Dark, and it's very close. So in terms of like playing against the world, you wouldn't have to adapt very much. But if you're going to change the rule set on your players in mid-campaign, again, that's a conversation you want to make sure you have with them. I'm always very hesitant to change players' abilities, especially if they're things that they really enjoy or have been playing up. Very hesitant to change them. can often lead to an abrupt end to a campaign, in my experience. So thank you, Blood Wolf Ninja. Let's see. Scott Rosta, Rost, R-O-S-T-E. Scott asks, do you hit a point where you have too much content to ever use, so you should stop buying new stuff? So much good stuff I'm never going to get at this point. Yes, certainly, absolutely. Unless you're a collector, I would say don't buy things unless you're going to use them, or at least unless they're really cool and they're gonna inspire you or something like that. Like, just know thyself, right? And if you're like, look, I'm happy with what I'm running, I don't need all these books, don't buy them. Absolutely. This is an interesting economy we're in right now. Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, and buying unnecessary things, like unnecessary if it's just for the sake of buying them, right? I would say no. I'm a mad collector. I like collecting. That's my hobby. And the channels actually, especially with these affiliate links, have been really helping me because I can get a lot of new books with your guys' support, and I can review them on the channel. I can have them. It's cool. It's really great. I'm getting probably more than I otherwise would simply because you guys use my affiliate links, and then I can get those books. That's really cool for me. Not everybody's in that situation where you have like kind of a self-funding hobby. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. Don't buy stuff unless you think you're actually going to use it, or it's going to be really inspiring to you, or you're a collector. That's what I'd say. If it's simply for there's a very obvious is the wrong word. There is a very strong saturation point. I was talking about that in the video I did recently with 5 essential, books for OSR GMs to make their own worlds. In my opinion, there are saturation points where a book becomes useless because it's too much, or you have too many products, and so you have to pick one, and they overlap to the point where it's actually not useful to have both. It's like, there's people who collect cars, right? There's some people like billionaires who collect cars, and it's like, cool, you have, amazing cars, and you can try out each one and drive this one and drive that one. Mostly you're not driving them. Mostly they're just parked in a garage somewhere. It seems to me it's kind of a waste. Unless they're like a collector, right? Unless it's like the very fact of owning them is the hobby. And then I wonder about that. But still, if that's the case, then yeah. But I have not hit a point where I feel that I have to stop buying. But I probably would if I didn't have the channel and it weren't providing enough for me to get a few new books, every month or something like that. I would probably stop. In fact, there certainly have been times in the past 2 or 3 years when I have wanted books and I've said, nope, I'm not going to get them. I don't have the money. I can't justify buying those. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for the question. Let's see. TroyVink8216 asks, what are you most looking forward to in which you've purchased via Kickstarter or back or kit for this coming year? Any specific adventures, systems, or campaign books? Yeah, so Dolmenwood certainly is probably I'm most excited for the physical copy. I have the PDFs, I've been reading through them, but I'm excited to get all the physical stuff because I'm going to run, once I get them, I'm going to run for my nephews who live near me, as opposed to online. I have a group that I'm going to be running for online, and I can start that now. In fact, we're going to start on Tuesday. This upcoming Tuesday, we're going to start the campaign making characters. But for the home system, I want to wait until I have the book. So that's a big one. The Western Reaches, although I don't know if it's this year specifically. It might be into January of 2026 or maybe even later, but upcoming. I'm very excited about that. There's a few others too. I actually did a video a while back about this. Bitter Chalice, that's one that I'm really excited for. It looks really, really beautiful. It's like a mix of medieval art with like Yoshitaka Amano's art from Final Fantasy. He did all the Final Fantasy sketches and all the art there. I really like that. Yeah, so I think Bitter Chalice is another one that I'm really excited for. Pirate Borg, really excited for Pirate Borg. Again, I backed that physically, so I'm going to get all those physical books. I'm really excited for that too. But I would say, if you're interested, check out that video I did, because most of those things have not come out yet from that, upcoming Kickstarters that I'm most excited for. I did a video on that. Thank you, Troy. Let's see. A Zombie Necromorph, or Zombie X Necromorph, asked, is there a niche or aspect in TTRPG products that you'd like to see explored? I wish there were more Spark tables, and similar to the tables in Tome of World Building. A niche or aspect in TTRPG products. That's a really good question. I think there's a lot of really good, a lot of avenues are already being explored quite well. I would like to see more in terms of map making. There's things I'd like to see less of. I'd like to see a lot fewer races, ancestries, and classes. I think those are really, really clogging up a lot of people's creativity. I shouldn't say clogging up, but I think a lot of people who are otherwise really good creators on DTRPG are spending a lot of their creative energy making ancestries and classes. Maybe it's just easy to make and people are trying to make some money, because often they'll charge, $1.99 or $2 or $3 for, a class or a pack of 5 classes or something like that. That stuff is just stuff I don't think it's useless, but it's close to useless for me because of how easy it is to develop your own classes and ancestries. I think if you're gonna use custom ones, you should just do custom ones. And you can use, a lot of people have free ones out there, and you can use those as inspiration. I've done that, but I just think it's overdone. There's so many people who are releasing books full of classes and ancestries, and you see this with a lot of settings too. People will release a setting, and half of it is the ancestries and the classes for that setting and the spells for that setting. And I'm like, and spells are better. Spells are more interesting. But I'm like, no, if you're going to release a setting book, give me a setting, right? Give me cool rumors and hooks and locations and NPCs and factions and religions and cosmos and gods and demons and villains and monsters. Like, give me that. If you're going to give me a setting, give me all that. Giving me new classes and ancestries, for half of the book, say it's 150 pages and it's 70 pages of classes and ancestries. Just not interested in that. So that's what I would like to see it explored a little less. I think Spark tables would be really good. I think I'd like to see more map making. I think I'd like to see more people doing hand-drawn maps. Dyson Logos is great, but we've seen Dyson Logos' maps a million times now, and everybody uses them, and I'd like to see people making their own maps. It's not that hard to make your own maps. In terms of just, there's a lot of good software out there that you can use now that actually is relatively cheap and or free, commercially even. Dungeon Scrawl, for example, or you can do hand-drawn maps. I think people should get back in, especially with the whole advent of AI, AI maps, AI art, AI writing. I'm getting, and I think a lot of people are with me on this, I'm getting to the point where I would rather have really crudely drawn stick figure art almost than AI art. Everyone uses it for a while it was just so bloated. Every product had AI art. You go on DTRPG now, and about half of the products on there, especially in the free section or in the pay what you want section, which is what I tend to frequent, it's just AI. And you can, if the art is done with AI, probably much of the adventure was written with AI. And it's like, look, if that's if that's what you're offering, I can get that on my own through AI. Right? You can ask ChatGPT or Grok to make you an adventure, and it will do it for free. So if you're going to present me with an AI piece of art and an AI adventure, what are you doing, man? I can do that. So don't give me something that I can do, and it'll probably be more tailored to what I want than what you're presenting to me. So if you're going to do something, make it yours. Creative, original, whatever. Do it. Right? And I'm much more likely to be drawn to even badly drawn maps, and if they're drawn by hand, and crudely drawn art if it's done by someone, than I am to products that look AI. Okay, so enough of that rant. Michael Mullen Fiddler asks, what your house rules and what rules do you borrow from which game to put in another game? I kind of already answered that for Shadow Dark, so I won't go into that too much here. But that's basically what I would say. The house rules are that. There's little things here and there that we do at my table that is different than other tables, but that's true for everybody. And I don't know. It would be hard for me to put my finger on exactly what I'm doing that is a house rule technically. I think almost everybody's games are going to be house ruled. No tables play the game the same way. I think that's just absolutely true. I don't think there's any table that plays it the same way as another table. Any game, Shadow Dark, D&D 5e, Castles and Crusades, whatever system, it's going to be different than every other table. But I've talked about the ones that I did majorly at the beginning of the video. Thank you for your question, though. All right, let's see. Maxwell Pattern asks, top 5 adventures, top 5 creators, top 5 rule systems. Well, I talked about top 5 adventures already. Top 5 creators, that's a really interesting question. I have to think about that. I really like Gavin Norman. I think all of the Necrotic Gnome stuff is really, really good. I really really like Gabor Lux. I think EMDT and Castles and Tillin and that whole line of products are really, really good. I'm a big fan of Ben Milton over at Questing Beast, and I think his adventures, the one-page adventures he has, Summer's End and all the ones in that book, Waking of Willoughby Hall, I hope he does more adventures. I really like those ones. So those are 3. let's see. Trying to think of new. I mean, I really like. Honestly, I like Free League. Free League. I know they're not particular, like they're kind of the publisher rather than the particular creators, but everything that they've done. I have the Vesson book I really like, which they were kind enough to send to me. I haven't reviewed it on the channel yet, but they sent me. Free League sent me that book or the PDF of it. I like Symbaroum. I really like The One Ring. I like Dragonbane. Yeah, so I think that's a really good one too. Top 5 rule systems? That's harder for me as well. Top 5 rule systems. I might say Shadowdark, Old School Essentials, Mouse Ritter, The One Ring, and then fifth there. I might say 3rd edition D&D. 3rd edition D&D, not because it's excellent, but because it's my nostalgia, my love. I go back to 3rd edition fondly whenever I see the 3rd edition books or anything like that. Anyway, thank you, Maxwell, for that. All right, now I'll just do a couple emails. Really, I'll just have time for one here. So I won't go into it too much. This one is by just Jason. Hi, I found your channel and I'm going through the videos now. It's going to take me a while. I'm reaching out because I recently backed the Western Reaches Kickstarter, or Shadow Dark setting, and I'm building the thing out of Foundry. That's really cool. I'm looking for recommendations or some short mini dungeon style things I can essentially drop into this setting as my players go. Well, I think, you can go through my channel. There's a ton on there where I talk about what you can do. So I'm not going to go into that here. I would say, go to my channel. But if I had to pick a few very small mini dungeons, I think the Shadowdark mini dungeon crawls that you can buy in a pack of 5, those are pretty good for drop-in adventures. Honestly, I would say do something like take a dice and logos map and roll a quick dungeon for it. If you want a very small mini dungeon style that you can drop in and the players can kind of encounter and move on, just use the Shadowdark dungeon design tables and use a dice and logos map, and you'll have a perfectly, roll boss monster and then add a couple other monsters in there and you're basically good. Or a tribe of monsters or a family of monsters, whatever. That's what I would say. Take it as an opportunity to make your own micro dungeons. Mini dungeons are a great thing to get practice in. Now I know you're saying, hey, I just want to run this and drop things in. You don't mind doing conversions. What I would say is try doing that. Try building your own adventures. Very small micro mini dungeons, 2 rooms, 5 rooms, and see how it goes. And if you really don't like it, well then you can always, again, adapt lots of the adventures I've mentioned on my channel, my grab bag videos, my 8 short adventures or 6 short adventure videos. But I would try it. Try making your own, using those tables from Shadowdark or OSE or really any book has tips on how to build your own dungeons. Try it. And if you don't like it, if it takes too long or you find that you don't like the result of it, there's lots of good stuff. So anyway, that's what I would recommend. All right. Well, again, thank you to everybody who asked questions. I don't have time to go through the rest. Like I said, there's a ton that people sent me through my email. But a lot of it did kind of get covered in this video. So I hope it's been interesting to everybody. If you do have more questions or things you'd like me to talk about or answer, feel free to leave a comment here or to email me. And if I get enough of them and they seem like of interest to me to do another video on, I might. But otherwise, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you all in another video.